This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. And today's topic is anger and what it does to us. There's certainly a lot going on in the world today, and a lot of things that can often do cause us anger. And I think it's important to try to uh, break it down, unpack it somewhat. I'm going to start with a story, which is a true story, a troubling story that Rabbi Pesach Krohn tells in one of his Magid books. He has a whole Magid series. And it is a story about a Gemach. Gemach is an acronym for Gemilut Chasadim, and it's a term that we use for any sort of free loan or lending for free, different, whether it's money, whether it's items for people to use. And in Israel and certainly the Haredi communities, there is a tremendous amount of gemachim, as they are called, that help people out with different needs during different times. And very often a gemach, when it's a monetary, so of course it is interest free. Jews are not allowed to take interest or pay interest to other Jews, and therefore it is a free loan that is set up. And normally these gemachim were open on Thursdays in Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, so people could come borrow their food for Shabbos. By Thursday night, closed because whatever money was available for that week was already gone. One gemach remained open on Friday mornings, and that was run by a fellow by the name of Ruvain. In case someone needed something the last minute, he was there for them. There was not much money left by Friday, but some people might be in desperate need, so he stayed open. One time, a young married man came in asking to borrow money for Shabbos, for his Shabbos needs. That fellow had been there the day before on Thursday. So Ruvain said, if I remember correctly, you were just here yesterday. The man got angry and said, are you trying to tell me that I don't need the money? No, we're not saying that at all, Ruvain replied very calmly. Well, then lend me the money that I need. I have co-signers already. And when borrowing from a gemach, the usual procedure was to have arivim, have co-signers, people who would guarantee the loan, that in case you would not be able to pay it back, would have the funds necessary for the next people who would need, and the co-signers would need to step up. I've got co-signers, the fellow said. Ruvain looked at him compassionately and said, we have a policy that we can't lend twice within such a short period of time. I'm very sorry. The fellow got enraged, stormed towards Ruvain, and slapped him in the face. This gentle Ruvain was in shock and disbelief. Ruvain's assistant, who was there, stepped forward and was about to retaliate, but Ruvain held him back. Wait a moment, Ruvain said to the young man. I'll be back with the money. He came back with money, gave the bills to the young man, and wished him well. The young man thanked him and left. People who were there could not believe it. You should have thrown the guy out. You should have thrown the guy out of your office. He had the audacity to go forward and smack you. And then instead you gave him a second loan. Ruvain explained, I know this person. Under normal circumstances, he never would have reacted in such a way. He must be going through a tremendous difficulty if he completely lost himself like that. That's what made me realize how desperate the situation must have been. And therefore, I decided not to be angry, but to help him. Like I said, it's an interesting story, and I'm sure there are those that say, well, no, he shouldn't. The person acts like that. The person doesn't appreciate it, right? So you should send him out. I'm sorry if everybody else could just please mute. Otherwise, there's a little bit of bounce back. So everybody, please feel free to unmute when you want to speak up, but otherwise, please mute yourselves. It makes it a little bit easier for everyone to hear well. But I think there's a very, very important aspect over here. Whether we feel that we could have reacted or not reacted if we were faced with such a situation. But I think the key towards so much in life, so much of our interactions with others, and so much when it comes to anger, is to recognize on different levels, as we'll explain, it's not about you. It's not about you. If this person is reacting, if this person says something, or even if God does something, which we'll touch upon also, right? It's a matter of trying to go out of our own head into someone else's head and to recognize they're dealing with what they're dealing with. God, of course, it's different. We'll come to that. With another human being, they're dealing with that which they are dealing. And I happen to be here in front of them. And it's really not about me. And it's a question of, can I get beyond my own self and see what is it that this other person is dealing with? The same way that with a child, with a toddler, when they're having a tantrum and they're kicking and screaming, right? So you just recognize they're going through a tough time. They're on sensory overload. They're not able to deal with what's coming at them. And as much as they're kicking and screaming, what do? You pick them up and you hug them. And you say, I love you. It's okay. It's okay. Let's try to calm down. Let's try to calm down. Because it's not about you. You recognize that they're having their normal toddler tantrum. Well, adults also have their tantrums, and they might express it in a different manner. And they might express it with cruel words or whatever it might be. But to be able to step back and say, this person's also having their adult style tantrum. And the same way that with a child, I try to have compassion and understand and try to feel what they're going through, with an adult too. Okay. We're going to touch upon 3 different areas. And that is the anger. Anger causes personal damage, social damage, and then spiritual damage. So let's begin over here with our first source, which is the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud in Psachim, where Reish Lakish said, Kol Adam shekoes, every person who gets angry. It's interesting. The English says any man, but the Hebrew actually says Kol Adam, every person shekoes. Right? It's almost a rule, a law of physics. Im chachamhu, if that person is a wise person, chachmato mistaleket mimenu, his wisdom is going to leave, at least for that period of time. Im novihu, if the person is a prophet, nevuato mistaleket mimenu, his ability for prophecy will also be lost. And we find this by none other than Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, when he got angry after a certain war against Midian, when captives were taken, and he got angry, and his chachma was mistaleket mimenu, and he was unsure about certain halachot as a result. And we know that when we get angry, we go into this frenzied mental state where we don't have what's called the Yishuv Hadat, that calm mind, that calm thinking, which is the only time that we make good decisions, is when we are able to calmly think it through and measure it. And when we are in a frenzied state, so then the brain is not working at its full capacity in terms of a proper reaction. We're going into fight, flight mode. We're having this sensory overload, and it causes us to make bad decisions. All right, this is very, of course, important when it comes to disciplining children. That if we're angry, that's not the time to discipline, because we're not going to be making wise, well thought out decisions. And as during our class when we discussed the sin of the golden calf, a decision of lima, to what? What result do I want from my reaction? And will my reaction bring about that result? And when we're angry, we are just reacting, we're not responding. And reacting is what makes us feel good at the moment. Responding is trying to bring about the hoped for result. And number one, certainly we lose our wisdom. We're not running on all cylinders, and we're not going to come out with the best, the wisest of decisions. That's the immediate consequence. Rambam, Maimonides, in his Hilchot Deot, Laws of Conduct, and there he's talking about the different mido, the different attributes. And Rambam is known that he says you take the middle road. When it comes to all these different attributes, you want to take the middle road. You don't want to be overly frugal. You don't want to be overly loose with your money. Always the middle road, and he speaks about how if you've bent too much in one direction, you've got to bend somewhat in the other direction in order to right the ship. The example that's given, you have a piece of paper that's folded a certain way. So if I want to straighten this paper, I can't just straighten it. If I just straighten it, it's going to go back to there. I've got to bend it the other way. And then once again, it'll be able to be straight. So that's the usual approach that he takes to midos, except a few exceptions. One of those exceptions is anger. And he says there we must distance ourselves from it. Ubale kas, source number 2, the Rambam Maimonides, Bale kas, ein chayehem chayim. Wow. Their life is not a life. They have no quality of life. Lefikach, therefore, tzivu lihitrachek min hakas. We have to distance ourselves from anger. Ad sheyanhig atzmo shlo yargish afilu l'dvarim hamachisim. Even those things justifiably cause a person to be angry, this person is able to absorb it. It's able to just wash over that person. They're not going to allow it to get inside of them, as we'll discuss a little further. The anger is corrosive. It eats away at you. And if a person is able to retain that equanimity and not allow it to pierce, not allow it to get inside, then, as the Rambam says, their chayim is a chayim. Chayim chayim. Then their life will be a life. But otherwise, it is a life of constant anger and dissatisfaction and unhappiness constantly. We don't have it here in the sources. The Orchot Tzadikim says that anger causes a person to be stubborn and to deny the truth, right? Because I'm locked into my way and I can't get off my horse. I've mentioned before that when I was learning in yeshiva in my younger years, I would tell my chavruta, my study partner, that if we're debating something, arguing something, and I start to raise my voice, that's a good indication that I know that I'm wrong, but I'm having problems admitting it and letting go with my approach. So when you hear me doing that, do me a favor, come in for the kill quickly, point out my mistake, and that will be able to keep on going. But when we start to get worked up, then already we're not worried so much about the truth, but we're more worried about digging in and maintaining our position. Now, there are many people that they seem to be very, very calm and polite and everything is great. But the true test of a person is how do they react when they are under stress, when they are in a situation that very well could provoke anger. How are they reacting then? How do they treat others then? What is their demeanor in those situations? And famously, the Gemara, again, the Talmud Bavli, this is now in Irvine, has a beautiful way of, just move this up a little bit so everybody can stay along with me. The Gemara says, Bishlosha Dvarim Adam Nikar. There are three things, three situations through which an Adam is Nikar. One can recognize who is this person really? What is this person really all about? And in Hebrew, it's a great play on words. In Hebrew, it's Bikoso, Bikiso, Ubikaso. Right? All these very similar sounding words. Koso is a person's kos. A kos is your cup, how one drinks, right? And Rashi explains when a person has a little bit of wine or other intoxicating beverages, how do they behave in those situations? That is koso. Kiso, one's kiss, is one's purse or one's pocket, right? So the person's business. How does a person do in their business dealings? Rashi says, Im be'emunah hu oseh. Is it done with integrity, with honesty, or do all the rules get thrown to the wayside when it has to do with a monetary gain? So koso is a person's wine, kiso is a person's pocket, a person's business dealings, uvikaso, and with a person's anger. Okay? That he is Rashi here. The English says he's not extremely demanding and not upset by things that anger most other people. Right? Is a person willing to let things go? Does everything turn into a capital case, or are they willing to overlook certain things? You know, as a parent, as a teacher, as a rabbi, there are certain things that it's better to act as if you didn't hear it, you didn't see it, right? If you did, you have to deal with it. It's a matter of sometimes letting things go, and if you're dealing with it, then the person needs to find a way to get off their horse, right? If you just let it go, then very often much angst and much pain can be saved on the part of the other person, and again on the part of ourselves also, because when we carry that anger, it is this corrosive part of us. Then there's the social damage. There's the tremendous damage that it causes to other people. And again, Rabbi Pesach Krohn, in another one of his Maggid books, tells a story of the yeshiva of Navardik. The yeshivas in Europe, post World War II Europe, there were no dormitory facilities. People would find places to sleep, would rent rooms, rent beds in different people's houses. There was no lunch hall, dining hall for the students. They would have what was called in Yiddish Essen Tag. Essen means to eat, Tag is days, and different balabatim, different community members would host amount of yeshiva boys, and the boy would know on Monday I could have my meal here, on Tuesday I have my meal there, Wednesday Essen Tug, and it was their meal. It wasn't like 3 meals a day necessarily. I remember when I was in Israel, and before I came back to the States to learn here in Yisroel, Israel, so I was at an Israeli yeshiva called Ber Yaakov for about 6 weeks. There was no food. Breakfast was salad, maybe some fruit. Supper was salad and some fruit. And lunch was the big meal. If they were serving chicken, you get an eighth of a piece of chicken. And I learned to eat white meat in yeshiva because an eighth of white meat has more to it than an eighth of dark meat. So that's how the boys would subsist in the yeshivas there. And most people were happy to have the boys as tenants. The boys would pay some rent. The families would pay some rent. And it was a source of parnasa, of some income for many people. One building, right, Krohn writes, where more than 20 rooms were occupied by students, was owned by a bitter woman who was a widow. She criticized the students. Her anger led her to sometimes turn off the water and electricity on a Friday afternoon. And most boys couldn't tolerate it, and they started to move out, find other accommodations. Who needs this? One student by the name of Yosef, one morning was coming home from shul. The woman yelled at him, "You must be crazy. Why are you still here in my building? All the other boys moved out. Why do you stay here?" He paused and answered softly, "I stay here for your sake. I realize you live alone. And I'm afraid that one night you might not be well. You might fall. And you'll call out for help. And no one will hear your voice. I understand when you yell at us, you're just letting out your frustrations and anger about the difficult life that you lived and continue to live. And the reason I'm staying is for you in case you'll ever need my help." He writes, the woman's face changed. Not what she expected to hear. She started to plead with the student, forgive me, young man. It never dawned on me that that was the reason you were staying. How kind and gracious of you." For days afterwards, she never said anything but kind words to any students that she encountered. Slowly, the word got around she was not as bitter and angry, and they started moving back into that building that she owned. Anger causes isolation from other people. Sometimes Natalie and I will encounter someone who's a very angry person, a very angry situation, and we'll walk away and just say to ourselves, thank God we don't live in the world that that person lives in. Meaning, when you're angry, you're seeing everything as being bad. So it becomes a very ugly world. And people don't want to associate with that. People don't want to be around that. And it's socially isolating, and taking it even further, that's for the strangers. But how about those even closest to us? Let's see the Orchot Tzadikim, which is source number 4 and 5. Let me move up a little bit for everybody. Okay, we'll just do 4 and then I'll move up again for 5. He writes there, Orchot Tzadikim, again, Orchot Tzadikim goes through the path of the righteous. He discusses different mido, different character traits, and positive and negative, and really analyzes them and breaks them down for us. Bnei Adam, people kashehem koasim, when they are angry, umachzikim bekaasam. Right? Very often it happens. We do get angry. Ideally, we don't. There are times we need to look like we're angry. But the best case scenario is never be angry. Right? Sometimes with children, you have to look like you're angry. Remember when I was running a camp in Israel, and the very first night at camp, we were renting a yeshiva building, a high school, so we were in a dormitory. And these cutest little kids, they flooded the room. I couldn't believe it. Very first night, these cute little kids, they flooded the room. They thought it'd be funny. So I went in there and I had to look angry. I said, "What are you boys doing? What do you think? You think that's how you can do the summer? Should I send you home right away?" And they're looking at me with the cutest faces like, "We're sorry, Rabbi Ciner." And it was hysterical. And I said, "1 second." And I went to the other room. I burst out laughing. And then I got myself a serious face again. I went in and spoke to the kids again. It was hysterical. I had to look angry, but I wasn't angry. It was kids being kids. There are times we need to look angry, but ideally we should never actually be angry. And if we do get angry times and we falter, so important, as he writes here, umachazikim b'ka'asam, not to hold on to that anger. That's the corrosive aspect. To let it go. To let it go and be able to move on. But people who get angry and hold on to it, they don't realize what they're doing. They'll do many things in their fit of anger that there's no way that they would do if they were not angry. If they had the time and the presence of mind to think this through, this is not a good idea. It causes a person, it literally removes the seichel, the clear-minded thinking of a person. They get into arguments, disputes, quarrels, fights, variables, all because of this ka'as. Right? We lose our perspective, and something that's really ill-advised seems to be a smart idea when we are angry. But who suffers the most? Hakasan ein lo chen. Oh, sorry, source number 5. Let me scroll down. He continues. He writes, Hakasan, the angry person, ein lo chen be'enei ha-briot. But who sanu be'enem? He becomes a person who is hated or at best disliked by others. People don't accept this person. And the ones who are hurt the most are those who are closest, the spouses, the children. They're the ones who can't escape it. Right? You know, a certain situation I mentioned before, Natalie and I were able to walk away and go back to our own home and not have to contend with it. But when that is the home, right? When it comes to spouses, when that is their innermost chamber, that is, or for children, these are their parents. That takes the greatest toll. Years ago, there was a conference, a rabbinic conference that the RCC held, and the speaker was about domestic abuse, and how very often the person with their anger is a person that in the community is the most gracious, kind, sweet, upright, respected community member. And this person, he or she, has a real Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde persona. And once that person is in the privacy of their own home, their children, their spouses are on the receiving end of terrible, terrible anger and sometimes even physical abuse. And it's so much more impossible for the family is, who would believe it? No one believes it. This is the most gracious, kind, giving, calm, polite man or woman in the community. And it turns that which is supposed to be the refuge, that which is supposed to be the safest place for the family to enter into their cocoon, it could turn that into literally a living hell. And it's so important that very often, the example that I give, if I'm in front of the refrigerator, I'm looking at something, I turn around and there's a child or a grandchild there. It's like, what, why are you standing right here? Is our initial reaction, right? If I'm waiting to cross the traffic light by Culver and Michael, and I turn around and suddenly there's someone right behind me, I say, excuse me. But when it's someone close to us, it's not excuse me, but it's why are you standing right? Very often we take liberties with those who we are closest with, and we have to make sure that we them as well, if not better, than someone than an outsider. Right? They have us all the time, so they deserve the best version that we can come up with of ourselves. Finally, he continues there, I don't have it in the notes, that an angry person, even if he has Torah umasim tovim, even if he has Torah and good deeds, ein ha'olam lameidim mimenu. Right? People are not going to learn from that person. Right? We want to set a good example. We want to we want to be a shining light to others. And even with good deeds, if it's an angry person, people are not going to recognize that. They're not going to learn. They're not going to emulate the good from that person. So the person loses out tremendously in terms of themselves and causes tremendous harm to those who are all around. The Gemara says that a person who gets angry, it's as if we'll see. Let's go a little further down. All right. So far I've just spoken about the ill effects. Okay, that's great. But how are we supposed to get past it? So let's do 6, and then 7 will help us in that respect. In terms of the harm, the spiritual damage causing to ourselves. So the Me'ir Einayim on the Gemara Brachos writes as follows: Shekol Laila, every evening, every night, Be'et Aliyat HaNeshamot, when the souls ascend, Kotevet Hayad Kol Ma Shechet Adam B'Zeh Hayom, the heavenly hand writes down all the good and all the sins that a person did. If a person had an angry heart on that day, the only thing that gets written down is that person's anger, not all of the individual wrongdoings. There's no need to write any further. If that's there, everything's there. Once there's anger, then the floodgates open. And that is what causes all of the other bad choices, sins. When the Gemara says, Lo alta biado, all he's got in his hand, see, he's viewing that in a Kabbalistic sense. Ritzono lomar lo alta yado lichtov. That's all that gets written down. This is something that is the gateway. We say certain things are gateway drugs. This is a gateway midah, a gateway attribute that opens up all of the other that people make, bad things that people do. So let's see the Gemara Shabbos. The Gemara there says, Hamakare bigadav bichamoto. A person who tears his clothing in anger. Hamishaber kela bichamato. Throws things, breaks things in anger. Bamafazer maota bichamato. Throws money around, whatever it is in anger. Yehi beinecha ka'oved avodah zara. It's as if that person is worshiping idolatry. Mikra, what's the verse? What's the connection? It says, Lo yevecha el zar v'lo tishtachvel el nechar. There should not be in you a foreign god. Do not worship foreign gods. What foreign god is within us? That is this yetzer hara, this evil inclination of anger. So what is the connection? What is the connection that the sages are making between anger and idolatry? And I think with an understanding in that, we can have a key as to how we can, in those stressful moments when something happens and we can either react with anger or we can control ourselves, there's something to try to keep in mind, to focus ourselves on. And that can be, I think that is the key when we can to retain our calm, serene equanimity. Why am I angry? I get angry because this should not have happened. This is not the way things should work out. This is not the way things should have happened. Let's take it a step further. If I was running this world, if I was in control here, this wouldn't have happened. It would have gone differently. But sadly, since I'm not in control, God, that's why things went south. That's why things turned sour. That's why it didn't work out the right way. Meaning that when I'm getting angry, for that moment, I'm cutting God out of the equation. God is not in control of this world. So I might say, well, I'm not angry at God, I'm angry at this person who did this. But we have to realize, as one of my rabbis once put it, my bechira stops at your nose. Meaning, my free will can only affect you if for whatever reason the heavens have decreed that it should affect you, that you do need to deal with the results of my free will, decision, action, words, whatever it is. So it's tantamount to idolatry. Idolatry is cutting God out of the equation and putting my trust into another force, another power, another thing. It's cutting God out of the equation. What I'm getting is I'm cutting God out of the equation. And I'm angry because if I was running the ship, it would have been better. It would have gone the way that I wanted. That, my dear friends, the sages teach us, is tantamount to idolatry. And if a person can take that deep breath and say, for whatever reason, I am supposed to be dealing with this challenge. Maybe it's in order, like in the case we saw before, to see past the person's outer veneer of anger and see that there's a person hurting really, really badly inside. And instead of getting all self-righteous and how dare he speak to me about that, like that, if I'm able to say, wow, this person is really hurting. What can I do to try to help this person? Right? For the toddler, we pick them up, give them a hug. So what type of hug would be appropriate for me to give this person? If we recognize, that's why God sent this person to me with their anger. Or maybe God sent that person to me with their anger. And very often I tell people, hey, right, get it out on me. Just don't bring it home to your wife. Don't bring it home to your kids, right? Maybe God sent this person to me because I can handle it. And let the person get it off their chest. And maybe I can help, maybe I can help. But I'm doing this kindness, and this person is now able to unload and walk away calmly and not unload on someone else who won't take it in such a way. Maybe God is allowing this interaction to take place with me because I'm supposed to learn something. Maybe I wasn't sensitive enough to this person or to another person in a similar situation. And I see how angry this person is over what that person did to him. I think to myself, wow, I did something similar to this other person. And I didn't realize just what effect that could have on that person. If we can retain this thought that there's coming to me, and let's say it's not a person did this to me, maybe it is God sent. So they are not going to say, well, maybe God's having a bad day. Obviously, that would be a heretical thought. But there, a person needs to think again. If God is sending this to me, God loves me more than my mother and father and grandparents and spouse and children all together, all rolled up into one. So if he's doing this, there's a reason for it. Do I understand his reasons? No. There's a funeral, there'll be a community funeral tomorrow morning. And one of the things that the mourners say after they tear their garment, right before they tear their garment, is Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, that we accept that God is the true judge. And therefore, I'm not going to understand all that happens. But I recognize it's coming from a loving, benevolent parent who's able to do anything and everything and chose to do this. There's a reason for it. To accept it. I'm willing to accept it even though I don't understand it. Whenever we're making a blessing on food that's not, we make the blessing Sha'akol Niyah Bidvaro, food that doesn't grow from a tree and doesn't grow from the ground, and it's not cake, and it's not wine, and it's not bread, then the catch-all blessing for that is Sha'akol Niyah Bidvaro, that everything came about through God's words. And that's why we're thanking God for that item, that chocolate that we're about to eat. That's the blessing that we make. But it's a very, very powerful message that we're saying. Sha'akol niyah bidvaro, everything, not just this piece of chocolate, but everything, every event, every situation, everything that I'm faced with. Niyah bidvaro came about from his words. So this really, I believe, is the key that a person can try to bring themselves to the point. This might just be a nisayon, a chance for your personal growth. That you're not going to get angry in this situation. And the reason to you is to give you this opportunity to become a greater, gentler, calmer, less angered person. It's almost like an audition. It's an audition. They want to see how are you going to act during this audition. It's an interview. They want to see how are you going to respond to this interview. The heavenly cameras are all set up. Action! And that person walks in front of you and presents you with this challenge. And it's there for you to overcome. not to get, as I like to say, not to get sucked into it. Because so often it's not about you, it's this other person's issue that they're dealing with. Don't get sucked into that. Retain yourself, retain your autonomy, retain your control of yourself. You can't, they made me angry. No one makes you angry. People can do things that anger, but don't give them control over you. They didn't make you angry. You chose that reaction. And like I said, the key is to recognize that it's this non-avodah zarah, this non-idolatry approach to the world. Nothing is happening just by circumstance. On our Monday night class, we're doing Derech Hashem, the path of God from the Ramchal. And we're in the midst of a big chapter on Hashgacha Pratit, which is divine providence, divine orchestration. And to recognize the things that are happening for a reason. Are we privy to those reasons? Sometimes yes, most of the time not. But it's not haphazard. It's not the luck of the draw. It's not the coin toss. It's measured. And the Steipler writes that the amount of tsa'ar, the amount of difficulty that a person has to go through is measured exactly. So I always say, it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. It's hard to get out of bed to come to the minyan or to do this. You're going to have that amount of tsar anyhow during the day. Use it in a productive manner. You could stub your toe, or you can get up and help someone else. You can have amount of tsar. Use it well. Invest it well. Invest it in a way that will bring you and the world dividends. That's really what this Gemara, or this approach of this Gemara, is so powerful, because we could have all the sources about the pain that's caused and the hurt that's caused to oneself and to others. Very good. But this Gemara, or this approach to this Gemara, is giving us the roadmap of how to keep ourselves out of the fray. And if and when we inevitably trip up, mess up, and do get angry, then not to be machazikim b'ka'asam, as we saw from the Orchos Tzadikim, to make sure that we can, all right, I lost it. Okay, now what do I do? Now let me get myself together. And I'll just add, if there are situations which we did in, it's important to sit back afterwards and analyze that and give it some thought and say, okay, this is what I did. This is what happened. How should I have reacted? And that way, hopefully, if and when a similar situation arises, you're good to go. I had such a situation, and I was living in Israel, and my parents, Aleim Shalom, they had an apartment in Israel. They were visiting there, and they were going back to the States. I didn't have a car at the time, so I couldn't drive them to the airport. So they hired a cab to come, one of these services that come with a big van and pick up people on the way to the airport. So I got there earlier, and I spent time with them, and I helped them bring their bags down, and I was ready to help load them up onto the van. The van pulls up, and the driver is really in a rush and really angry, and he starts yelling, we have to rush. And then he says, oh, so many suitcases. And it's a van service to the airport. And it's at least, so you figure 2 suitcases per person. They didn't even have 2 suitcases, whatever it was. So I got angry. And I started yelling back at the cab driver, saying, they're older people. What are you yelling about? They're here waiting for you. And their suitcases are not so big, right? And we're going up and back. My parents get in. I kiss them goodbye. They go. I say to myself, Ciner, you idiot. Here's your parents, and they just said goodbye to their son, the Rabbi in Yerushalayim. And what's the picture they have as they're driving off to the airport? Their son yelling up and back with the cab driver. That's not the way. That's not the picture you wanted to leave them with. And I said to myself, so what should I have done? I felt very bad. I said, what should I have done? And I came up that what I should have done was I should have not engaged the cab driver at all. I should have said to my parents, he must be under a lot of pressure. That way I'm being what's called dan l'kaf zchut. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. I'm treating him, speaking of him, I'm judging his situation in a kind, gracious manner. He must be under a lot of pressure. Let me help load up as quickly as I can. Goodbye, mom and dad. But not get sucked in. So that's what I thought to myself, that's what I should have done. And a few months later, actually, I was in a store with a friend and I was shopping there. And it was a very crowded store. And there was someone who was loading some bags onto the shelf. And I squeezed by with my cart, and my cart grabbed one bag and pulled it down. And the laws of physics and gravity took over, and other bags also fell. And the guy started yelling at me that for making. And I turned to him and I said, I'm so sorry. I apologize. I turned to my friend and I said loud enough in Hebrew so the guy would understand. I feel so bad. It's late at night and he's working so hard and I'm making more work for him. And I bent down. I started helping, picking up all the bags. And I did exactly what I thought I should have done. I didn't engage that person. I apologized. I spoke graciously about why he was reacting the way that he did. And I did what I could do to help. This person turned into my personal shopper after that. He was following me around. And he heard me say to my friend, I wonder where the diapers are. Oh, diapers, aisle 2 on the left-hand side. Why? Because instead of jumping on him when he got angry, I judged him well. So inevitably, when we do falter, we do make our mistakes. So it's important to step back and say, okay, that wasn't how I wanted to handle it. How should I have handled it? And when that situation or a similar situation arises, hopefully we'll be able to do it, to make the right call. Source is that Gemara, the Talmud Bavli, Kedushin, where we had before the Kabbalistic idea of Darsh Bar Kavra Kafra taught, Ragzan, an angry person, Lo alta biado el ragzanuta. Right? So we had before Lo alta biado, the Kabbalistic idea that all that goes into the hand of the heavens that writes down the person's deeds of the day is anger. But this is a more surface explanation. What do we gain from our anger? There's nothing left for the angry person except the anger. Meaning, there's nothing that's gained. We don't react in a positive manner. Our reaction is not something that's going to bring about anything that's positive. All we have is the anger, right? And very often the other person has moved on with life. Right? I've told this story before. One of my Rabbeim in Israel would tell, Rav Mandelkorn Zechron Levracha, would tell a story. A guy who was stuck in traffic, and if someone else was trying to get in, and he very generously waved that guy in, and then later on, a few miles down, he's stuck trying to get in a different lane, and that guy doesn't let him in. And he's furious with that guy. I can't believe that guy. And he gets to work and he's angry with his coworkers, and his wife calls, he's angry with his wife. His whole day is shot. He's so furious with that guy. As he's leaving work that day, he's taking the elevator down from the 9th floor. The elevator stops at the 4th floor. The door opens and that guy walks in. He looks at him and says, you ruined my day. Because of you, my boss is angry, my coworkers are angry, my wife is angry, you. And the guy says, excuse me, do I know you? Right? This guy's all fired up. That guy doesn't even know what happened. All we have left is our own anger. That's the only thing that we walk away with. Nothing positive, and just that negative aspect. So that is the takeaway. The takeaway is that we don't want to have a takeaway from relations, because the only thing that we take away, if it's anger, is going to be that corrosive inside of us, build up. Everyone else is going on with their life, and we're still, all angry about it, and to recognize the roadmap, which is we live in God's world. People say it's a small world. I say it's a big world, but it's well organized. We're living in God's world over here. The situations that come our way are for a reason, and let's use them in the positive way, in the most positive way that we possibly can. Okay, my friends, we'll call it over here. Welcome from Memphis. Good having you join us. Welcome, everybody. A good Shabbos. Yes, Basil.
Just a couple of thoughts I have on anger.
Yes.
And one thought is anger gets you into situations, and then pride keeps you there.
Nice.
Okay. The other one I have on anger is that 80% of people who got angry are usually shouting at themselves.
Are usually what?
Shouting at themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other thought on anger is if you feel you're going to get angry and you're in a meeting, get up and leave the room. Take a walk and come back. It'll be different.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. 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 My friends, next week I'm away at a rabbinic conference in Florida, so we will not have Lunch and Learn next week. But I look forward to resuming next week. Also, Rosa, Tuesday morning. I'll be away all week, so Tuesday morning also. We won't have the classes next week. We'll resume, please God, the week of March 6th. Okay, everybody. Good seeing you all. Thank you for joining. And a Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Be well, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.